So this week, I heard a pretty amazing story. It was the first time this week they announced that they had a successful eyeball transplant of the full eyeball. Literally, they called this a successful surgery, but they don't know if he's going to regain his sight. The reason that I tell you this story is because we've been going through the book of Matthew now for the last 6 months, or Mark, I'm sorry, through the book of Mark. I don't even remember what book it is. So we've been going through the book of Mark for the last 6 months. And as we've been going through, we have seen Jesus do multiple miracles, amazing things. Literally, there was one night that he was just up all night at this house healing people. We've seen him cast out demons. We've seen him literally do everything from restoring physical function to the lame to raising the dead. And today we're going to read another instance of what Jesus has done in his ministry. And if we're not careful, again, this can become old hat. Like, oh yeah, Jesus healed a blind guy. Cool. This story should remind us that after 2,000 plus years of medical advancement, of all of the technology available, this man had dozens of surgeons on his team who were working with the organ before transplant, working with him during the surgery, working with him after the transplant. And not just surgeons, but he had doctors and immunologists. He's literally on dozens and dozens of different types of medication to be able to facilitate this transplant that happened. And yet Jesus had an even greater result with just a word. Whenever he said, "Your sight is restored," this man's sight was restored. And I think it's important for us to remember that because, again, as we read through, especially the Gospels, and we see miracle after miracle and amazing work after amazing work, we can be like, yeah, this is just another one. Yeah, Jesus, you raised somebody from the dead, so where do you go from there, really, right? After that point, how are you going to improve upon that? But whenever we read these things, we should be amazed. They should cause our hearts to sing for the glory of Jesus Christ, because as we read the story of a man whose name is Bartimaeus, and of Jesus restoring his sight, while it might to us be just another in a long line of miracles that were done, I guarantee you for Bartimaeus, it was a life-changing experience. And so today we're going to be in the book of Mark, chapter 10, and we're going to be starting in verse number 46. Mark, chapter 10, starting in verse number 46, if you'd like to read with me. And it says this. And they came to Jericho, and as he was leaving Jericho, his disciples and a great crowd, Bartimaeus, a blind beggar, the son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside. And when he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to cry out and say, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And many rebuked him, telling him to be silent. But he cried out all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." And Jesus stopped and said to him, "Call him." And they said to the blind man, "Take heart, get up, he is calling you." And throwing off his cloak, he sprang up and he came to Jesus. And Jesus said to him, "What do you want me to do for you?" And the blind man said to him, "Rabbi, let me recover my sight." And Jesus said to him, "Go your way, your faith has made you well." And immediately he recovered his sight and followed him on the way. So starting off here, as we get into the story, we see now that Jesus is continuing his march to Jerusalem. If you remember last week, people were literally amazed and afraid because Jesus was going to Jerusalem at literally the biggest feast day. This is leading up to the feast of the Passover. And his disciples know the Pharisees and the religious leaders and the political leaders do not like Jesus. Right? But yet he has set his face towards Jerusalem and he is headed that direction. And so now he has come from the region of Galilee and he has made his way down across the Jordan, and now he is coming through Jericho, and this is about 15 miles to the northeast of Jerusalem. So he is continuing to make his march down, and he's being followed by this huge crowd. Often Jesus is followed by crowds. We know that from looking at his ministry. But this is probably a mixed crowd. This is a crowd both of those who are his disciples and have been following him for a while, and also people who are just going to Jerusalem. people who are making their way there for the Feast of the Passover. Most of the Jewish people would make their way into the city of Jerusalem. So as this is happening, this is most likely his disciples as well as a group of people who are just making their way down to Jerusalem. And we get this picture of this man sitting there beside the road, and he is begging for alms because he is blind. And this guy actually picked out a really good spot, because if you think about it, if you're having these dozens and dozens and hundreds of people who are coming in to Jerusalem from the outlying territories, he's like, hey, this is a pretty good spot to be, right? Like, if I need to be able to get a little bit of money to support myself, there's going to be a lot of people coming through. Hopefully, these people will see me. These people will take pity on me. They will obey the word of the Lord, and they will be generous to me since I am destitute. And he found himself sitting there on the road. And I love the fact that we don't know exactly how. He's a blind man sitting there on the side of the road, but somehow the word makes it to him that Jesus of Nazareth is in the crowd. That somewhere in this mass of people that he can't see, who are just moving by him, in the darkness he hears somebody say, hey, you know Jesus of Nazareth? The guy you've heard all these rumors about, the one who is healing people, the one who is doing these mighty works, the one who is standing against the religious leaders and the Pharisees. He's in that crowd. And the man can't contain himself. And so he cries out, because he can't just be like, hey, where can I find Jesus, right? He can't make his way through the crowd and just figure out who this guy is. So he does the only thing he can do, and he cries out with a loud voice, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And this is an amazing statement that he's making. Up to this point, we know that people have looked at Jesus as a teacher. They have looked at Jesus as someone who was useful to their specific cause. They have looked at Jesus as many things, but only up to this point has Peter made the profession that Jesus is the Messiah. He said, you are the Christ, the Son of God. He is the only one who has connected Jesus directly with being the Messiah. And now this blind man sitting beside the road, it's he who makes that connection by crying out, Son of David, have mercy on me. This was a term and a set of words that was specifically used for the Messiah. Whenever they were talking about the one who was going to come and set things right in Israel, they would say the Son of David is going to come and he's going to sit on David's throne. Whenever they talked about all of the problems and the issues in Israel, they would say it's okay, the Son of David is going to come and set all things right. When they talked about Roman oppression and Roman occupation, and they said, yes, this weight is great, but one day the Son of David will come and set all things right. And this blind man sitting beside the road makes that connection that this Jesus of Nazareth, this man who he's never seen, this man who he's only heard whispers about, that he is the Messiah. And that's amazing. I think it's interesting as well that this random blind man is not some random blind man, but he has a name. And Mark makes sure that he records that name. He is Bartimaeus. And I love this too, because Bartimaeus is an Aramaic name, okay? And because he is writing to a bunch of Greek listeners, he actually translates the name for them. So it's like, hey, this guy's name is Francisco. You can call him Frank. Like, I love that. So and that's what he's doing for his Greek listeners. He's like, this guy's name is Bartimaeus, but to you guys, he is the son of Timaeus. That's literally what his main name means translated into Greek. He is making sure that his listeners know this, and I love that, and I think that the purpose for that is specifically because they could go and probably find this guy during that time, this man who had been blind, this man who had been touched by Jesus in such a way that he was probably running around out there still telling everybody about the amazing works that Jesus had done. And so they're like, hey, listen, his name is Bartimaeus. I'm giving you his name because you can go find him, and he will tell you the truth about what Jesus has done in his life. But I love the fact that it mentions his name. This is the only gospel that does mention the name specifically in the writing, and I think that's amazing because, again, to Jesus, this wasn't just some random blind man. This wasn't just some guy. He had a name. And it's the same with all of us, right? That we're not just some random person sitting in some random room on some random Sunday. Jesus knows your name. Jesus knows your name, and he knows your need. So as we continue here to read about the plight of Bartimaeus, again, sitting beside the road, gets word that Jesus is there, and he cries out, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And then we see in verse number 48 what happens. It says, many rebuked him, telling him to be silent. And he cried out all the more, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Have you ever been desperate in your life? Like truly desperate, where you didn't really care about, the things that you normally worry about. Like I don't like to be embarrassed. Okay, so I don't like to bump into people. Okay, like in the store, if I'm with the cart, I'm like, please go by me. I'll hold the door open. I'll like wait 20 minutes because I don't want to bump into you. I don't want to like try to get around you. Like I don't want to be rude, so I'm trying to do this. But let me tell you about what I'm talking about specifically. So there was a time in my wife and I's life where we were, let's just say we were broke. We were really broke, okay? Like, we were so broke that I literally remember one time that my wife called me because I always put gas in her car, but she was like, hey, I'm on empty. I need to put gas in the car. How much can I put? I'm like, $4. Like, that's what we got, right? Like, you put $4 in. If you do any more than that, I don't know where it's coming from, dig for change. Like, that's what we have. So we were really the Lord was still providing for us and sustaining us, but we were definitely broke. And during that time, we got invited to, she worked for a nonprofit at the time, and working for this nonprofit, they put on this benefit golf tournament. And this benefit golf tournament was a really big deal in the area where we were at. I mean, literally there were billionaires with a B who would like come to this thing, which was crazy, right? Because we're like these two broke kids. We had been married for about a year. We had moved 4 times during that year. We're trying to get everything figured out. And yet we're here eating steak like, what is this place? And something happened that showed the desperation of our situation. They started throwing out $100 bills. Like, I know. Like, it was, I was not expecting this. We're sitting there and we're eating, and all of a sudden, this thing comes flying past my head in an envelope, and I'm like, what are they throwing out? And the lady sitting next to us is like, oh, well, they always throw out $100 bills at this thing. Okay, now me, the guy who doesn't want to bump into people, doesn't want to, I'll be honest, this wasn't my greatest moment, but whenever I found out that they were just throwing out $100 bills, I was like on the ground, like getting around, picking up all these different, because I was like, that's a $100 bill. You have no idea how much. $100 is a lot of money. Like, we were making our schedule at the time around okay, well, we can eat at the church for Bible study on this day, and we can eat at the church for Bible study on this day, and we can do these, and so $100 was a lot of money. And during that, I didn't have any idea what my desperation would look like until it came to then. And then I was like, all of my normal patterns, all of my normal things that I would never do, all of a sudden went out the window because I was desperate at that moment. And that's just a silly example, but this man was truly desperate. He didn't have any hope of an eyeball transplant. That was still 2,200 years away in the future before he'd even be able to hear about something like that. He had no hope of a physician coming through. He had no substance. He was not wealthy, so he couldn't look for a doctor or a surgeon or some traveling person who could possibly help relieve his ailment. Instead, he was completely destitute, sitting beside the road, begging for money, and he had one shot, this guy named Jesus coming by. And so he yelled out, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And they told him, shut up. Jesus doesn't want, calm down. Just go back to what you were doing. Don't worry about it. Stop yelling out. And he yelled all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. There's something about being desperate for the Lord. And as much as there was times in my life where I would get on the ground and crawl around for a $100 bill, I asked myself, am I desperate for God's work in my life today? Am I truly desperate for that? Is that something that I am seeking for? One of our memory verses a few weeks back was that more than all riches, we desire the word of the Lord. Do I feel that way on a daily basis, that more than all riches, more than anything else in this life, what I need is Jesus. What I need is the Lord. What I need is his work and his word in my life today. And this man understood that completely. He understood desperation. And so even as he sat there without any other hope, without any means of rescuing himself, which is where we all are, even if we don't like to think that, he cried out, Jesus, have mercy on me. And we see something really interesting happen in this next verse, and I think it's important for us to note in verse number 49. And Jesus stopped and said, "Call him." And they called the blind man, saying to him, "Take heart, get up, he is calling you." Man, they changed their tune really quick, didn't they? Like before, stop talking, shut up, stop it, don't do that. It said they were discouraging him and dissuading him and said, "Don't cry out." And then all of a sudden, as soon as "Oh yeah, absolutely, take heart, come on." That's why we don't base our lives around the whims of this world and around the people who are around us, because unfortunately, there are so many people in our society and in this culture who will turn like that on the drop of a hat. They will go from telling you to shut up and that you're worthless to being your best friend as soon as they have an opportunity to, right? As soon as it's beneficial for them. So we have to be so careful, because Bartimaeus experienced this in just a couple of seconds, right? Of like, no, be quiet, stop talking. Oh, Jesus wants to see him? Hey, take heart, it's great, he wants to see you, be encouraged. It's crazy how quickly that group of people changed whenever Jesus called this man, whenever all of a sudden they're like, oh, maybe he is somebody important. Maybe he's somebody that we should look at. But even before, whenever everybody else was telling him to calm down, to stop crying out, to quiet down, Jesus saw him, and he was important to Jesus. But to the crowd, it was not until he was valuable to them that they took sight of him. And we have to be really careful that we don't see others like that too, right? I heard the story one time of a new pastor coming into a church. And as he was coming into this church, he was supposed to have his first installation Sunday on that Sunday. And as everybody was walking in, they noticed this homeless man sitting out there on the sidewalk. And as they were coming in, he was just kind of holding up his little cup, said, "Anything helps," you know. And some of the people came and they brought him a cup of coffee and they invited him into the church. And other people were just kind of like, "Come on, kids, you know, like let's kind of take the long way around." And they were all shocked to find out that the person who got up there to preach the first sermon was this man who they thought was the homeless man sitting out there in front of the building. And one of the things that he said specifically is, he said, "I wanted to see how you would treat me whenever you thought I was nobody, because that tells me who I can trust to love those who Christ loves." I think that's an interesting story. Now, whether it actually happened or not is hard to tell, but I think it does at least say something specific, that in this world that we live in, there's going to be people who want to ascribe value, who want to give worth, and who want to say, these people are worthy, these people are not worthy. As soon as these people kind of have something that I need or something that makes them stand out, then sure, absolutely, I want to be their best friend. But as soon as that's gone, then I'm gone. And we have to be careful not to be those people. We have to be careful that it's not just those people who look like us, those people who we like, those people who live in the same neighborhood and keep their grass nice and mowed. Like, those are the people that we really like. But those other people out there, I just try not to think about them as much as possible. And if I have to think about them, I'm like, please get away from my car. Don't touch my window, right? We have to be very careful that we are not fickle like the crowd, but that we are stable like Jesus, who sees this man, hears this man, and calls this man, even before anybody else placed value on this man. And so then as we come to verse number 50, we see the man's response. And throwing off his cloak, he sprang up and came to Jesus. Now that's a great response, right? Now he didn't get naked, but I mean, he was like, hey, I don't need anything to stop me. Like, he threw off his cloak and he was just like, I gotta go. And which is also pretty amazing, because if you think about this is a blind man, right? He doesn't know where he's going, right? He can't see Jesus. Jesus isn't like, hey, come over here. He can't see. He just jumps up and he just starts running in the direction of that voice. And I love that picture too. Again, that picture of not having all the details, not being able to see everything, but whenever you hear the call from Jesus, you just start running after it and you just start going towards it, and you're like, we'll figure it out along the way. I think that's a pretty good picture of just the Christian life in general, right? Is that we don't always have all the answers. We can't always see everything that's going on around us, but we hear the voice of Jesus and we're like, I'm going. Like, we'll get it figured out as we go. And so that's what this man does. He throws off his cloak, he jumps up, and blindly starts running towards the voice of Jesus. And Jesus said to him, "What do you want me to do for you?" Kind of a leading question, isn't it? Like, Jesus knows this man is blind. Jesus knows what's going on in this man's life. We've seen over and over again that even whenever people are just thinking things, Jesus knows what they're thinking. That even before the disciples say something dumb, Jesus is like, that's dumb, right? Like, that happens all the time where Jesus can already see what's going on in these people's lives. And so he has this man coming before him who is obviously blind and begging on the street, and yet he still asks the question, what do you want me to do for you? As I read that and I was thinking about that this week, I thought a lot about just the idea of prayer, right? Sometimes we feel like, why are we praying? God already knows what we need, right? Like, God knows my situation. Like, why would I pray? Why would I ask for him specifically for things? And I think this is a great picture of that. It's like Jesus did not know that this man wanted to be able to see. Like, Jesus knew exactly what was going on. But there was something that happened in the act of him saying that, in the act of him bringing his request to Jesus and Jesus fulfilling that request that was needed for this man. And I think the same is true whenever we pray, right? Because, again, God knows everything about our lives. And that's why I love the way that kids pray sometimes of like, Jesus, I got a boo-boo 2 weeks ago on my knee and it's left a scar and I don't like that. And, like I have this going on and this going on. And they'll list like every single thing that ever happened in their entire life whenever they're praying. And sometimes our prayer is like, hey, God, you know the deal, right? Like, help me, bless me, change things. But I think there's something whenever Jesus tells us over and over again throughout Scripture, ask and keep on asking. Come to the Father boldly, to the throne of grace, and make your requests known to God. There's something about whenever we are talking to the Lord that making our requests specifically known to him does something for us. I think it's important for us in those times because whenever we start to process through those things of like, Lord, this is tough. The situation at work is really tough. And this person that I'm working with is really hard to get along with. Or I'm having this family issue and my family is crazy, Lord, and I don't know what to do for them. So Lord, would you help me with that thing? Lord, you see our bank account. You see where we're at. And yet I bring it to you, Lord God, and I ask you to do something about it. I think there's something that is so good for our hearts whenever we start to pour them out to Christ in that way. Even though he knows, even though he is fully acquainted with everything that we could ever need, whenever we open up and we tell him those things, it does something for us that is really necessary for our walk with him. I love the picture of the Old Testament. King Hezekiah had just gotten a threat from the king of Persia who would come to him, and he said, we're going to take you out. We're going to take you down. There's not going to be one stone standing upon another stone out there. And they had written all of these things out, and they had given him the ultimatum, surrender, and we'll take you away to another land, and we'll settle you over there, or don't surrender, and we're going to kill every single one of you. And when King Hezekiah got this word, what he did is he went into his chamber, and he took this document that had been given to him of, hey, we want to tear you down. And he laid it before the Lord, and he said, Lord, behold their threatenings. Like, you see everything that they're saying. You see everything that they are doing. And he laid it out before the Lord and then asked the Lord that he would intervene. And I think there was something cathartic for King Hezekiah about that, laying that out before God and saying, see what they're threatening, see what they're doing. Lord, work and move in the midst of that. I think there's something for us that needs to be done. So in our prayer life, and again, we've talked about prayer so many times that it's so vital and yet obviously and often one of the first things that we kind of let go, of actually being intentional about. But I think in our prayer life, there's something that is so healthy whenever we sit down and we say, you know this already, God, but do you see it? You know this already, God, but I want to tell you what's going on. You know this already, Lord, but do you see these things going on? And will you be active in those things? Because there's also something that's really special whenever we pray those things specifically and we see God answer those things specifically. So we see now in verse number 50, that after he threw off his cloak and Jesus said, what do you want me to do for you? The blind man said to him, Rabbi, let me recover my sight. And Jesus said to him, go on your way. Your faith has made you well. And immediately he recovered his sight, and I love this last line too, and followed him on the way. That's beautiful. So we see here now in this picture, the blind man going from destitute, sitting on the side of the road, begging for people to throw him some change. And all of a sudden, he hears the word that Jesus. Now you can imagine being blind and living off of stories, right? Like you can't see the world around you. And so maybe you have some beggar friends who come over and are like, hey, let me tell you what I saw happen. Let me tell you what I saw happen over here, because your whole entire world is just wherever somebody grabs you and leads you by the hand, and you start to hear these whispers of Jesus of Nazareth. And you probably think it's a little crazy at first, right? Like, hey, I already fed 5,000 people with like 2 loaves of bread. And you're like, right, yeah, really sure he did that. But then the more and more that you're sitting there, the more and more that you hear these reports coming in from different people. I heard that he had a man who was lowered down through the roof of this house, and this man couldn't walk, and all of a sudden he laid his hands on him. He said, not only should you get up and walk, but your sins are forgiven. And he's like, wow, that's amazing. He hears about his interactions with the Pharisees who believed, apparently from some of the verses that we see, that this man was probably blind because of his own sin. They're like, hey, listen, you're a sinner, that's why you're blind. Pharisees who would probably have nothing to do with him, who would never touch him, and yet Jesus stands up to them in grace and in truth. And he starts hearing more and more stories coming in from all these different towns. I heard that he went over to the Samaritans, and whenever he was over there, that he touched people and he healed people. He touched Samaritans? You're not supposed to touch those people. That's amazing. And what at first was unbelievable, after story after story after story, something happened in his heart, and he started to believe. To the point to where whenever he hears Jesus of Nazareth is in this crowd, he doesn't just think, hey, my meal ticket. He doesn't just think, hey, this person is coming who's going to be able to change my life. He fully believes that this person who he's heard these stories about, this person who has healed the sick and raised the dead, that he is the Messiah. That he is the one that Israel has been waiting for, that he is who Jesus has now been working for 3.5 years to get everybody to believe about him. This man believes it. Little by little, hearing story after story, he came to believe that Jesus is the Messiah. And so whenever he asked Jesus to restore his sight, Jesus tells him that it's his faith in the person of Jesus that has made him well. And instantly, he recovers his sight. And much to this man's credit, he doesn't receive his sight and be like, all those things I wanted to do all those years, whenever I couldn't see, I'm going to go take care of them. Right? Like, he didn't even go and look up at the sky and be like, it's so blue, and run to different places and say, I've always wanted to see what this looked like. I know that guy's voice who was always mean to me. Now I'm going to go find him. He didn't do any of those different things. Instead, whenever his sight was restored, and Jesus almost casually says, go forth, your faith has made you well. And Jesus continues his march towards the cross in Jerusalem. This man doesn't run off to take care of his own stuff. He doesn't run off to go and find some old friends and be like, I can see now. Instead, he follows. He follows the one who has changed his life forever. And again, I think this is a beautiful picture of not only the way that we all come to Jesus, but how we're